Yeah, the Communist Party of Vietnam, right? So we have the one party, it's the Communist Party of Vietnam. And they have this sort of the elite state, sort of the administration of the country, and they also the society, sort of culturally and so forth, right? There's one central government in Hanoi, you know, and until about 2 months ago, Vietnam was sort of dissected into 63 sort of administrative provinces, right? So 63 provinces, and the provinces have quite some power, right? So you have a provincial Ministry of Education, a provincial sort of they're called departments, right? Department of Education, a Department of Investment, and a Department of Science. So when they say department, and it's always a provincial one, right? And the ministry is up here in Hanoi, right? Now, if you have 63 provinces, it's a bit a lot. So there's a lot of departments here. So since two months ago, the government has decreed to merge some of these individual provinces. So now we have actually, and this went overnight, only about 32 or so provinces. You know, so for example, Ho Chi Minh City has gobbled up all these parties. So we actually, the province, Ho Chi Minh is a city, but it's also a province, right? So actually, Ho Chi Minh Province goes all the way to the beach in Vũng Tàu. If you live in, Vũng Tàu, this is the closest beach here. This actually belongs to the province of Ho Chi Minh City. So there was an administrative measure, sort of more efficiency, makes a lot of sense. And it's quite surprising because some of these provinces have been around for hundreds of years, and overnight, basically, they just ceased to exist because they merged with a bigger province, and it just didn't exist anymore, right? So this went overnight, and for example, in Germany, changing the name of a road takes decades. And here, they just changed the provinces very fast, right? What people actually oftentimes overlook is that there are direct elections here. So you can, it's a one-party state, but you actually elect people. You elect sort of the representative of your neighborhood, right? So every 4 years, there will be elections here. And so they're free, fair, and so forth. Okay, ready to eat? Yeah. So so we have, it's not this sort of super top-down political regime, right? It's actually you elect the neighborhood guy into the neighborhood sort of council, and then within that council, they elect to the next instance of a higher level council, and then so forth, all the way you end up in Hanoi. So there's within the party, within the one single party, there's actually a lot of democratic structures there, and also a lot of meritocracy. So only the best sort of gets elected, right? So very important. That's why actually the people in Hanoi, they're actually quite good, right? Because they made it all the way up there, right? So there is some kind of democracy, but within the one single party, right? So it's not the parties that fight against it here in Vietnam, but it's within the party where the political competition sort of takes place. And I think this is oftentimes forgotten, right? So there is some meritocracy for politicians, accountability, and so forth, right? Vietnam, in typical communist fashion, they have these 5-year plans. We're just ending one plan. We actually know already. So, for example, 2025. One of the big goals in that 5-year was digital transformation of Vietnam, sustainability and growth, how to reconcile, growing very fast at the same time, not, having a very large sustainability footprint and so forth, right? So, one last thing is that, I'm going to talk a bit more about this later on. State-owned companies, about 1/3 of the economy. About 30 years ago, that was 100%. In a communist country, so the economy has gone through privatization, economic reforms, and things like that over the past 30 years that I would like to share in a moment. All good?
Yes.
Yeah?
Good.
So far?
So far.
All right, okay. Vietnam has grown, of course, since here's a chart, this is the 1960s. We have a GDP of about $3,800 per capita, makes it poorer than Indonesia. I looked it up this morning. Indonesia has about $5,000 per capita. So Indonesia is ahead of Vietnam, if you want, in absolute numbers. Since about 11 years, in 2009, Vietnam joined what the World Bank calls the middle income countries. Before it was a lower income countries. So they have basically 3 buckets of countries: the high income, middle income, low income. And to get assistance from donor countries, to build a highway, to make more schools, you actually have to be a lower income country. Germany wouldn't give any money to a middle or higher income country, right? Because they're not needy, right? So suddenly Vietnam, about a bit more than 10 years ago, Vietnam was heavily reliant on overseas development assistance. Like, okay, can Japan finance a new hospital here, or we need a new bridge there? And always that was financed by ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. And then when you join the club of the middle income countries, no more. So basically you have to run by yourself, right? And Vietnam did a good job by sort of like making this transition of financing large infrastructure projects with internal resources. We'll talk about that, right? On average, 6.5% growth over 25 years. That's quite amazing, right? Because that's an average of 25 years. Every year, 6.5% growth, right? That's actually sometimes overlooked, right? It's sort of China in the 1990s or something like that. But if you think about it, our students, undergraduate students, they're about 20 years old, right? So what this 6.5% growth means for 25 years means that our undergraduate students, when they were born, Vietnam was 1/10 in economic size of what it is today. So during their lifetime, in the past 20 years, the economy has tentupled. This is times 10. Times 10 during their lifetime, right? So it's about, the size of the economy. 2005, this is 10 years ago, was $50 billion per year. Very small. $50 billion per year. That was the size of the GDP of Vietnam. And then 10 years later, it's 5 times or 11 times that. And this is the lifespan of our students, right? So they were born in Vietnam. That is completely different from, that was completely different from what Vietnam is today. Okay? So enormous transformation has happened over the past 20 years. You know, I've been here for 15 years, and sometimes people ask me, so what is economic development? If I come to Vietnam, stand on the street corner, and you just see how things change, right? And you are in Indonesia, it's probably similar too, right? But I just, you know, many of our students that were born in the countryside, very poor, sometimes not in hospitals, at home, and so forth, and now we have access to first world healthcare. And one other thing that is interesting, that is Vietnam. Vietnam has never had a year of negative growth, of decline. Even as I said, COVID, Vietnam plowed on. You know, then there was the Asian financial crisis. Vietnam went up. Right? Not one single year where we had negative growth since the starting point of economic reforms. At some point, you know, Vietnam has changed from a communist and sort of planned economy to a market-led economy. And this change occurred around, you know, just right after the fall of the Soviet Union. Maybe some, yeah, the end of the 1980s, 1989 or something like that. Like Soviet Union sort of disintegrated, then perestroika, openness, and so forth. Then the sort of China also sort of made market reforms, and also Vietnam then said, okay, we're gonna reform our economy. Going to reform the economy. Before that, there was no private ownership of companies. Yeah. So between 1975, which is the end of the Vietnamese War, about 1989, there was no private ownership of anything. Communist Party stuff, right? The land belonged to the people, factories belonged to the people, everything belonged to the people, right? There was no private economy. And then the government changed that, and sort of when the Soviet Union sort of fell apart, and said, okay, we're going to introduce you know, private sector. So you can run a small little coffee shop, fine, you know. And the big kind of change really was then in 2000, when there was what they call an enterprise law. 2000 was really the kind of starting shot for the unleashing the private economy here in Vietnam. Until 2000, you had to register if you wanted to do a business. You had to register. It took like long, many months to get approval, and maybe you didn't get it. So you had to get an approval, right? So it went through to sort of like some people would see the merit of your request to run a business. And in 2000, they say you just register. You know, you don't need to get approved, right? And that sort of unleashed really then the private sector here in Vietnam in 2000. We have our first stock market listing in the year 2000, so the stock market started then, it's 25 years old here in Vietnam. Then 7 years later, Vietnam joined the World Trade Organization. Of course, you know, that sort of favored exports from Vietnam, but also made Vietnam have to comply with certain rules, right? So, but World Trade Organization, during the financial crisis, as I said, there was Vietnam continued to grow. Then Vietnam, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has a different name, maybe it's a trading bloc, right? Sort of the RCEP, it's called now, never know exactly what it stands for. But so Vietnam is actually a big driver behind this training blocks, right? Then COVID came, problems for Vietnam and going up. So every time, so Vietnam is now, because they had the kind of government as the businessman in Vietnam, and reducing the government means also increasing the private sector, which means more efficiency and more competitiveness. And every time Vietnam has a little bit of challenge, they increase the private sector, like making it easier to register businesses. And these are things they're actually doing right now. So they, as you know, the Indonesia is also hit by the US trade policies. Vietnam, I think, worse than, not very clear actually, it's not very clear, because they say some products have, when you export to the US, some have 40%. So Vietnam now want to